screenplay based on true events. May 1945. The end of war. The beginning of understanding. The Rhine River Valley stretches endlessly under a pewter sky, littered with the debris of a dying empire. Smoke rises from distant villages as Allied tanks roll through abandoned German positions. The sound of artillery has faded to an occasional rumble, like distant thunder promising rain that will never come. General Wilhelm Hartmann, 62. A distinguished Wehrmacht officer with silver hair and weathered hands stands beside his staff car. His uniform, once pristine, bears the dust of retreat and the weight of defeat. Around him, his remaining officers gather in a tight circle, remnants of what was once the pride of the German military machine. Colonel Frederick Brennan, 34. A lean American officer with sharp blue eyes and a Boston accent approaches with a squad of MPs. His helmet bears the scars of recent fighting, but his bearing remains professional, almost respectful. General Hartmann, Brennan says in careful German, then switches to English. I am Colonel Brennan, 12th Armored Division. By order of Supreme Allied Command, you and your staff are to surrender immediately. Hartmann's aide, Major Ernst Weber, 29, a young officer with haunted eyes, steps forward protectively. Weber has seen too much in 4 years of war, the Eastern Front, Normandy, and now this final collapse. His hand moves instinctively toward his sidearm before stopping. Herr Colonel, Hartmann replies in accented but clear English, we surrender unconditionally. He unbuckles his officer's pistol and places it on the hood of the staff car. The metal clinks against steel with finality. The other German officers follow suit. Brigadier General Heinrich Müller, 57, a barrel-chested Bavarian who commanded mountain troops in Italy, removes his ceremonial dagger. Colonel Gustav Reiter, 45, a tank commander whose black uniform bears the Iron Cross, places his field cap beside his weapon. What strikes Brennan is not their defeat, but their dignity. These men expect execution, their faces show it. In the Wehrmacht, captured Soviet generals rarely survived. They assume the same fate awaits them. Your personal effects will be inventoried and returned, Brennan says, his voice carrying an unexpected note of courtesy. You'll be transported to a secure facility for processing. Weber translates quickly for the older officers. Muller's bushy eyebrows rise in surprise. This is not the script they expected. Sergeant Thomas Mitchell, 26, a wiry MP from Tennessee with gentle eyes, approaches Hartmann. Sir, you'll need to come with us now. Mitchell's tone lacks the harshness the Germans anticipated. He speaks as one professional to another, recognizing the insignia of rank despite the change in circumstances. When Hartmann stumbles slightly on the uneven ground, Mitchell offers his arm for support. The gesture, small, instinctive, human, reverberates through the group of prisoners. Müller exchanges glances with Richter. Weber's shoulders, rigid with tension, relax marginally. As they walk toward the waiting trucks, Hartmann observes the American soldiers. They're young, many still teenagers, but they carry themselves without the cruel swagger he expected. Their uniforms are practical rather than intimidating. Their weapons are ready but not threatening. Wo sind die Erschießungskommandos? Weber whispers to Müller, where are the firing squads? Müller shakes his head slowly. Ich weiß es nicht, I don't know. The trucks are clean, with canvas covers to protect against weather. Not cattle cars, not open flatbeds for public humiliation. The Americans help the older officers climb aboard, steadying them against the vehicle's height. Private James Rodriguez, 19, a medic from New Mexico, notices that Colonel Richter favors his left leg an old wound from the Russian front. Without asking permission, Rodriguez approaches with his medical bag. Colonel, if I may. He gestures toward the leg. Richter hesitates, then nods. Rodriguez examines the wound with practiced efficiency, then offers a field bandage. It's not much, but it should help with the walking. The kindness is so unexpected that Richter struggles for words. Danke, he manages finally. As the convoy begins to move, Hartmann looks back at the command post where he spent his final hours as a free man. The German flag has been replaced by the stars and stripes. But there's no ceremony, no triumphant display, just the quiet efficiency of victorious soldiers who seem more interested in ending war than celebrating it. They surrendered their flags, Brennan notes in his field report later that evening, but not yet their dignity. The trucks roll westward as the sun sets behind them, carrying their human cargo toward an uncertain future. In the gathering darkness, the German officers sit in silence, each lost in private thoughts of home, family, and the strange mercy of their captors. They had prepared for death. They were receiving something far more complex, the possibility of life beyond defeat. The USS Liberty Bell, a converted Liberty ship, cuts through the gray Atlantic swells 3 weeks later. In the converted cargo holds, hundreds of German POWs sleep in tiered bunks, the ship's engines providing a constant mechanical lullaby. The accommodations are Spartan but clean, a far cry from the cattle cars many expected. General Hartmann lies on his narrow bunk, staring at the riveted ceiling. Beside him, Weber reads a letter from his wife in Munich, one of the few that made it through the postal chaos of a defeated nation. The paper is thin, almost transparent, and the ink has run in places where tears fell. She says the Americans give food to children, Weber whispers in German, chocolate and bread. The children don't run away anymore. Mueller, occupying the bunk below, grunts his acknowledgement. The big Bavarian has been seasick for 3 days, his face green with nausea. Despite this, he's noticed something peculiar about their captivity. The guards, he says quietly, they don't carry clubs. No dogs. Just rifles they never point at us. Corporal David Santos, 22, a guard from Chicago with kind eyes and olive skin, appears at the end of the bunk row. He carries a clipboard and what appears to be genuine concern for his charges. "Gentlemen," he says in broken German, then switches to English. "Time for evening meal. Please form lines at the mess station." The German officers rise slowly, their bodies protesting the constant motion of the ship. Hartmann notices that Santos waits patiently, not hurrying them despite the ship's schedule. When Mueller stumbles, still queasy, Santos offers his arm without hesitation. The mess hall occupies what was once the ship's cargo bay. Long tables with bench seating accommodate the prisoners, while American sailors serve from steam tables at the front. The smell of beef, stew, and fresh bread fills the air, simple food, but plentiful and warm. Chief Petty Officer Robert Anderson, 38, a career Navy man from Oregon with graying temples, supervises the serving line. His weathered hands move efficiently as he portions out the meals, treating each prisoner regardless of former rank with the same matter-of-fact courtesy. "Guten Abend, General," Anderson says to Hartmann as he approaches the serving line. His German pronunciation is terrible, but the effort is genuine. Hartmann accepts his tray, metal plate, cup, utensils that are real silverware, not the wooden spoons he expected. The portion is generous. Stew, bread, vegetables, even coffee that smells authentic rather than the ersatz substitute Germany has known for years. At their assigned table, the German officers eat in relative quiet. Around them, conversations flow in multiple languages. Other German prisoners, a few Italians, even some displaced persons the Americans are repatriating. The noise is that of a crowded restaurant, not a prison ship. Lieutenant Commander Margaret Hayes, 31. A Navy nurse from Philadelphia with auburn hair and intelligent green eyes, moves through the mess hall checking on the prisoner's health. Her presence breaks the usual gender segregation of military environments, adding an unexpectedly civilizing influence. She stops at Hartmann's table, her medical bag in hand. "General, how are you feeling? Any seasickness? Headaches?" Her concern seems genuine rather than perfunctory. When Weber admits to stomach troubles, she produces tablets from her bag and explains their use in careful, clinical German. "Why?" Weber asks suddenly. "Why do you care if we're sick?" Commander Hayes considers the question seriously. "Because you're human beings," she says simply. "And because suffering serves no purpose once the fighting stops." The answer strikes Weber silent. In 4 years of war, He's grown accustomed to the idea that the enemy is something less than human. Hayes's casual assumption of their humanity challenges everything he's been taught to believe about American brutality. Later that evening, on deck for their allocated exercise period, the German officers stand at the rail watching the endless expanse of ocean. The Atlantic stretches to the horizon in all directions, gray-green and forbidding. Somewhere ahead lies America, a country they've been taught to see as decadent and weak. Seaman First Class Antonio Marcelli, 20. A young sailor from Brooklyn with dark hair and an easy smile, approaches the group. He carries a guitar case and seems genuinely curious about his passengers. "Any of you gents play music?" he asks, opening the case to reveal a well-worn acoustic guitar. The question catches them off guard. Colonel Richter, who played piano before the war, nods hesitantly. Marcelli hands him the guitar without fear or suspicion, a gesture of trust that would have been impossible weeks earlier when they were enemies. Richter's fingers find the strings, muscle memory overcoming years of violence. He begins a simple melody, not a German marching song or patriotic anthem, but something universal. A folk tune about longing for home. Other prisoners drift over, drawn by the music. American sailors pause in their duties to listen. For a few minutes, the artificial boundaries of war dissolve into something more fundamental, the shared recognition of beauty and loss. They expected lynching, Commander Hayes writes in her journal that night. They got, "Good morning, Herr General." The ship continues its journey westward, carrying its human cargo toward a land none of them fully understand. In the darkness of the hold, German officers sleep more peacefully than they have in months, no longer fearing dawn execution squads. Above them, American guards maintain their watch professional, alert, but remarkably free of hatred. They treat their prisoners as exactly what they are, defeated soldiers, not monsters to be destroyed. The transformation has begun, though none of them recognize it yet. Camp Pritchard, Virginia, sprawls across rolling hills 30 miles west of Richmond. What the German officers see as their trucks pass through the main gate defies every expectation they've harbored about American prison camps. No guard towers with machine guns, no barbed wire electrified to kill. Instead, a compound that resembles a rustic college campus. White-painted barracks with screened porches, administrative buildings made of brick. Even trees left standing to provide shade. The overall impression is of functionality rather than cruelty. Colonel James Crawford, 42, the camp commandant, waits in the reception area. A career officer from West Point with steel gray hair and intelligent brown eyes, Crawford built his reputation on organization and fairness. He speaks fluent German, having studied in Berlin before the war. "Gentlemen," he says as the German officers are assembled, "welcome to Camp Pritchard. You are prisoners of war under the protection of the Geneva Convention. You will be treated according to international law and the customs of civilized nations." His tone is formal but not hostile. He reads from a prepared statement outlining camp regulations, work assignments, and privileges. The German officers listen with growing amazement. They expected brutality. They're receiving bureaucracy. Major Susan Kellerman, 29. The camp's intelligence officer from Minnesota with blonde hair and sharp blue eyes steps forward to handle individual processing. Her manner is professional but not unkind. She treats each prisoner as a unique case rather than an interchangeable enemy. "General Hartmann," she says, consulting her clipboard. "You commanded the 15th Mountain Division in Italy?" "Yes," Hartmann replies carefully, unsure how much information to reveal. "You'll be assigned to Barracks C, along with other senior officers. Your quarters include a private room, desk for correspondence, and access to the camp library." The mention of a library startles Weber. "Books? We're allowed books?" "Educational materials, fiction, newspapers within reason," Kellerman explains. The camp maintains a collection in multiple languages, including German. Sergeant First Class Clarence Washington, 28. A career NCO from Georgia, with dark skin and patient eyes, approaches to escort them to their quarters. Washington's presence adds another layer of complexity to their expectations. A black American soldier in a position of authority over white German officers. The irony is not lost on Mueller, who remembers Nazi propaganda about racial hierarchies. Yet Washington carries himself with quiet dignity and professional competence that demands respect regardless of ideology. "This way, gentlemen," Washington says, his southern accent soft but clear. "Dinner's in an hour. After that, orientation with camp activities." Barrack C reveals another surprise. Individual rooms with real beds, not bunks. Lockers for personal possessions. Windows with glass, not bars. A common room with chairs and tables where prisoners can socialize or write letters. Hartman's room contains a single bed, a desk, a chair, and a small bookshelf. On the desk sits a pad of paper, envelopes, and a pencil, the materials necessary for maintaining correspondence with the outside world. "You may write 1 letter per week," Washington explains. "All mail is censored, but personal news to family members is generally approved." Weber stares at the writing materials as if they might disappear. "Our families, they think we're dead." "Many probably do," Washington agrees. "That's why the letters matter." The dining facility continues the pattern of unexpected normalcy. Long tables with benches, but also smaller tables for officers who prefer privacy. The food is institutional but adequate. Roast chicken, potatoes, vegetables, bread, coffee. Not gourmet, but nourishing and plentiful. More startling is the social dynamic. American guards eat alongside prisoners, not separately. Conversations flow freely. Prisoners asking questions about America, guards curious about German perspectives on the war. The atmosphere resembles a military mess hall more than a prison cafeteria. Private First Class Michael O'Brien, 19, a red-headed farm boy from Iowa with freckles and an infectious grin, sits across from Colonel Richter. O'Brien's openness seems almost childlike after years of military formality. "So, Colonel, what's Germany really like?" O'Brien asks between bites of chicken. "I mean, before the war, and all." Richter hesitates, then finds himself describing the Bavaria of his youth, mountain villages, beer gardens, festivals that lasted for days. He's surprised by his own willingness to share these memories with a former enemy. "Sounds nice," O'Brien says genuinely. "Hope it can be like that again someday." The casual assumption that Germany will recover, that it has a future beyond defeat, catches Richter off guard. American propaganda has painted them as liberators, but this young soldier seems to believe it genuinely. After dinner, Major Kellerman conducts a tour of camp facilities. The library contains thousands of volumes, classics of literature, history texts, current newspapers from major American cities. The recreation center offers games, musical instruments, even art supplies. "You're encouraged to pursue educational activities," Kellerman explains. "Many prisoners use their time here to learn English, study American history, or develop new skills." The workshop area reveals prisoners engaged in woodworking, metalworking, and other crafts. Their creations, furniture, tools, decorative items demonstrate skill and care rather than the minimal effort of forced labor. Master Sergeant Frank Kowalski, 35, a Polish-American from Detroit with calloused hands and a practical manner, supervises the workshops. His approach emphasizes learning over production. "Figure if a man's going to be here a while," Kowalski tells the touring group, "might as well learn something useful. These boys are good with their hands." The casual respect in his voice, referring to seasoned German officers as boys in the way older soldiers do, reinforces the strange atmosphere of the camp. These Americans treat their prisoners like wayward soldiers rather than captured enemies. As evening falls, prisoners gather in the common areas to read, write letters, or engage in quiet conversation. Some play chess or cards. Others practice English with patient American tutors, soldiers who volunteer their off-duty time to help prisoners learn the language. "Kindness in war," Hartman writes in his first letter home, "looks like a scandal." Yet as the German officers settle into their new routine, the kindness becomes harder to dismiss as weakness or propaganda. It appears to be policy, implemented consistently and without apparent ulterior motive. The Americans, it seems, actually believe in the principles they claim to represent. 3 weeks into their captivity, The German officers have established routines that feel almost normal. Morning formation, work assignments, meals, evening recreation. The rhythm of military life continues despite their changed circumstances. General Hartmann sits in the camp library, reading a biography of Abraham Lincoln. The book, written in English, challenges his language skills, but he persists. Something about Lincoln's leadership during the American Civil War resonates with his own experience of national division and military necessity. Chaplain Captain Richard Stone, 45. A Methodist minister from Ohio with kind eyes and graying hair, approaches quietly. Stone serves all prisoners regardless of faith, offering spiritual counseling without proselytizing. "How are you adjusting, General?" Stone asks, settling into the adjacent chair. Hartmann closes the book, marking his place with a finger. "It's confusing, Chaplain. We expected courts, martial, execution, labor camps. Instead, we find libraries and letter-writing privileges. Does that trouble you?" The question forces Hartmann to examine his own assumptions. "I commanded men for 30 years. I gave orders that cost lives, German lives, enemy lives. Now I follow orders from guards who call me sir and bring extra coffee without being asked." Stone nods thoughtfully. War creates artificial relationships. When it ends, people have to rediscover how to treat each other as human beings. In the workshop, Colonel Richter struggles with a different kind of adjustment. Corporal Eddie Santos, 24, a mechanic from San Antonio with patient hands and an easy manner, teaches him to repair radios, a skill that might prove useful after the war. "The key," Santos explains, "is understanding that every component has a purpose. Remove one piece, and the whole system fails." Richter finds himself thinking about armies, about Germany itself. How many essential pieces have been removed? How much can be repaired? And how much must be rebuilt from scratch? In Germany, he tells Santos during a break, "We were taught that Americans were soft, lacking discipline and courage." Santos grins. "A lot of German soldiers probably thought that right up until we kicked in their front door." The comment should sting, but Richter finds himself smiling instead. There's something refreshing about Santos's directness. No false politeness, but no cruelty either. Just the frank assessment of one soldier to another. Major Weber faces his own adjustment in the camp school, where Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell, 26, a former teacher from Oregon with brown hair and patient eyes, conducts English classes for prisoners who want to learn. The subjunctive mood is tricky in English, she explains to a mixed group of German officers and enlisted men. It expresses possibility rather than certainty. Weber appreciates the irony. His entire future exists in the subjunctive mood, possibilities rather than certainties. What might happen when they return to Germany? What could America become in their understanding? After class, he approaches Mitchell with a question that has been troubling him. "Lieutenant, why do you volunteer to teach us? We were your enemies." Mitchell considers carefully before answering. "Because teaching is what I do. War doesn't change that, it just changes who needs to learn." Her matter-of-fact tone suggests that this perspective is natural rather than extraordinary. For Weber, raised in a culture that emphasized tribal loyalty above universal principles, her attitude represents a fundamentally different way of viewing the world. Brigadier General Mueller struggles most with the camp's social dynamics. His Bavarian directness clashes with American informality, creating awkward encounters that reveal deeper cultural differences. Private Tommy Anderson, 20, a cheerful dairy farmer's son from Wisconsin with an easy laugh, tries to engage Mueller in conversation during evening recreation. Anderson's casual approach to rank respectful but not deferential confuses Mueller's expectations. "General, sir, my dad fought in the First War," Anderson says, setting up a chessboard. "Always said the German soldiers were tough fighters. Respected that." Mueller accepts the chess invitation but remains guarded. "Your father was American? Born in Milwaukee. His dad came over from Germany in 1885. Guess that makes us kind of cousins." The casual revelation that many Americans have German ancestry and that this creates kinship rather than shame challenges Mueller's understanding of ethnic conflict. If these American soldiers can acknowledge German heritage without embarrassment, what does that say about the inevitability of national hatred? As the chess game progresses, Mueller finds Anderson's strategy surprisingly sophisticated. The young American fights for every advantage while maintaining casual conversation, a combination that mirrors American society itself. "We fought men," Mueller admits later to Hartmann. "They treated us like men." The distinction becomes crucial as the German officers process their experience. They had prepared for battle between dehumanized enemies. Instead, they found themselves in a relationship between people who happened to represent different nations. Dr. Margaret Chen, 33, a psychiatrist from California with Asian features and gentle manner, conducts optional counseling sessions for prisoners struggling with adjustment. Her presence adds another layer of complexity, an American of Chinese ancestry helping German prisoners understand their own prejudices. Many soldiers experience confusion after capture, she explains to Weber during one session. "You expected one reality and found another. That dissonance creates psychological stress." Weber nods, grateful for professional understanding. "In Russia, we learned that capture meant death. Here it means possibility. What possibilities do you see?" The question forces Weber to articulate hopes he barely dares acknowledge. Return to his family, rebuilding his country, learning to live without the constant presence of war. "I don't know if I deserve these possibilities," he admits. Dr. Chen leans forward slightly. "Perhaps the question isn't what you deserve, but what you'll do with the chance you've been given." That evening, as the German officers gather for their informal discussions, the conversation turns to their growing understanding of American culture. What they're discovering challenges every assumption they brought to captivity. "They're strong," Richter observes, "but they don't need to prove it constantly. They're confident," Weber adds, "but not arrogant. They're patriotic," Mueller contributes, "but not tribal." Hartmann listens to his subordinates process their observations. As a senior officer, he feels responsible for helping them navigate this unexpected reality. But privately, he's struggling with the same questions they face. Who were they fighting? And who are they becoming? The mail call at Camp Pritchard occurs every Tuesday and Friday, drawing prisoners to the administration building with anticipation that borders on desperation. For many, letters represent the only connection to families scattered across a devastated homeland. General Hartmann receives his first letter from home after 6 weeks of captivity. The envelope, postmarked Munich and forwarded through the Red Cross, bears his wife's careful handwriting. His hands shake slightly as he opens it. Marguerite Hartmann writes from a displaced persons camp outside Munich, where she lives with their teenage daughter Greta. Her letter, written in careful script to conserve precious paper, describes conditions that are difficult but not hopeless. "Dearest Wilhelm," the letter begins, "we learned you were alive through the American Red Cross." Greta cried. With relief, we had feared the worst. The Americans have established feeding stations in the city. Chocolate for children, soup kitchens for adults. Strange to write such things, but their soldiers are not the monsters we expected. Hartmann reads the letter 3 times before fully absorbing its contents. His family is alive, safe, and apparently being cared for by the same army that now holds him prisoner. The parallel experiences create an odd sense of shared fate rather than separation. Major Weber faces a more complex situation. His wife Anna writes from their family farm near Frankfurt, now occupied by American troops who have commandeered the barn for equipment storage. Her letter reflects the awkward intimacy of former enemies, sharing living space. "The sergeant apologizes for taking the barn," Anna writes. "He offered to pay rent, which seems absurd. Yesterday he helped me repair the chicken coop without being asked. When I thanked him, he said his family keeps chickens in Kansas. The personal becomes political, and politics becomes personal." Weber shares this passage with Colonel Richter, who has received similar reports from his family in Bavaria. Richter's brother Hans, a civilian engineer, describes American soldiers helping to restore water service to their village. "They're rebuilding what we destroyed," Richter observes. "Not just infrastructure, trust itself." Master Sergeant Frank, Kowalski oversees the camp's mail operations, ensuring that letters flow freely in both directions while maintaining necessary censorship. His approach emphasizes facilitation rather than obstruction. Letter from home can make or break a prisoner's morale. Kowalski explains to new staff members, "We censor for security, not for spite." The outgoing mail reveals another dimension of the prisoner's transformation. Early letters focused on survival and basic news. Gradually, they begin including observations about American society and questions about post-war possibilities. Brigadier General Muller writes to his brother Ludwig, a priest in Munich, describing the camp's chapel services where German prisoners worship alongside American soldiers. The shared humanity of religious observance challenges his preconceptions about fundamental cultural differences. "Today I prayed beside a Negro sergeant from Alabama," Muller writes. "His faith seemed as genuine as any I've witnessed. If God recognizes no distinctions of race or nation, perhaps human beings shouldn't either." Lieutenant Sarah. Mitchell helps prisoners compose letters in English when they want to practice the language. Her assistance goes beyond grammar correction to cultural interpretation, helping them understand American perspectives they want to communicate to families. Many prisoners want to explain what they're learning, Mitchell tells Chaplain Captain Richard Stone during their weekly staff meeting. They're becoming bridges between cultures. Weber's correspondence with Anna evolves into a cultural exchange by proxy. She describes conversations with Sergeant Robert Murphy, the soldier billeted in their barn, while Weber shares observations about American camp life. Through their letters, the separated couple process their changing understanding of their former enemies. "Sergeant Murphy showed me photographs of his farm in Iowa," Anna writes. "It looks remarkably like our countryside. When I mentioned this, he said wars are fought between people who have more in common than they realize." Weber shares this observation with Dr. Chen during one of their counseling sessions. "My wife is having the same experience I am, but in reverse. She's learning to see Americans as individuals while I'm learning to see them as a people." Dr. Chen nods approvingly. Parallel transformation. It might make your reunion easier. You'll both be changed by contact with the same culture. The mail system also facilitates unexpected connections. Private Tommy Anderson, the Wisconsin farm boy who plays chess with Muller, discovers that his grandfather's village in Bavaria is near Muller's family home. This coincidence leads to an exchange of family histories that reveals the arbitrary nature of national boundaries. "My great-grandfather probably knew your great-grandfather," Anderson tells Mueller one evening. Funny how their grandsons ended up shooting at each other. Mueller finds himself writing to his elderly mother about this connection, describing American soldiers as descendants of German immigrants who maintained the best qualities of their heritage while developing new ones. "They have our industry without our harshness," he writes. "Our discipline without our rigidity. Perhaps this is what we could become. German virtues adapted to democratic values." The most poignant correspondence comes from prisoners whose families remain in the Soviet-occupied zone. Their letters, when they arrive at all, paint pictures of hardship and uncertainty that contrast sharply with reports from the American and British zones. Colonel Gustav Richer receives sporadic letters from his cousin Werner in Dresden, describing conditions under Soviet occupation that fulfill the Germans' worst fears about captivity and defeat. "The Americans treat their prisoners better than the Russians treat their allies," Werner writes carefully, knowing his letters are censored. "Count yourself fortunate in your captivity." This correspondence creates complex emotions among the German officers. Guilt about their relatively comfortable circumstances mixes with gratitude for their good fortune and concern for compatriots facing harsher fates. "Home expected prisoners," Hartmann writes in his journal that evening. "They're getting back men." The distinction becomes important as the officers recognize their own transformation. They entered captivity as defeated soldiers. Through the medium of letters, they're becoming interpreters of American democracy for families who have never experienced it directly. Their correspondence doesn't just maintain connections, it builds bridges across the chasm of war, preparing foundations for the peace that must somehow follow. Late autumn 1945 brings the first war crimes trials in Nuremberg, and with them, a sobering reckoning for German officers who must confront the darker aspects of their nation's conduct. Camp Pritchard receives regular newspapers and radio broadcasts that force prisoners to grapple with evidence they can no longer deny or rationalize. General Hartman sits in the library reading Stars and Stripes, the American military newspaper, as it reports testimony from the concentration camps. The photographs and witness accounts create a cognitive dissonance that threatens his understanding of the war he fought. Dr. Margaret Chen notices the psychological stress among prisoners as news from Nuremberg arrives. She increases her counseling sessions, helping German officers process revelations that challenge their entire worldview. Many of you served honorably in a dishonorable cause, she explains to a group session. Reconciling that contradiction is essential for mental health. Colonel Richter struggles most visibly with these revelations. His tank unit operated on the Eastern Front, where the line between military necessity and war crimes often blurred. During individual counseling, he describes incidents that have haunted him since 1943. We were ordered to support SS units in anti-partisan operations, he tells Dr. Chen. I didn't ask questions about their methods. I told myself I was just following orders. And now I realize that ignorance was a choice. I chose not to see what I didn't want to understand. Major Susan Kellerman conducts interviews with German officers as part of the intelligence gathering for post-war planning. Her questions probe not just military capabilities but moral awareness, testing whether these men can contribute to Germany's reconstruction. General Hartman, she asks during one session, what did you know about the treatment of Soviet prisoners in German camps? Hartman considers carefully before answering. The question isn't just about gathering intelligence, it's about determining whether he has learned enough to deserve a role in building a better Germany. Too little, and I knew it, he admits finally. We were told Soviet prisoners were treated according to military necessity. I didn't investigate what that meant. Why not? Because investigating would have required action, and action would have cost me my career. He pauses. At the time, that seemed more important than individual lives. I was wrong. The admission costs him something, the last remnants of his professional pride. But it also frees him from the burden of defending the indefensible. Major Weber experiences his own reckoning through letters from his wife Anna. She writes about displaced persons in their area, survivors of camps and forced labor programs, who are slowly returning to life under American care. There's a woman named Sarah who cleans at the American headquarters, Anna writes. She survived Bergen-Belsen. When I asked her about forgiveness, she said hatred is too expensive, it costs more than she can afford. Her grace shames me. Weber shares this letter with Chaplain Stone during one of their discussions about guilt and redemption. Stone, despite his gentle manner, doesn't offer easy absolution. Forgiveness is possible, Stone says, but it requires acknowledgement of what needs to be forgiven. You can't skip over truth to get to reconciliation. The camp's evening discussions among German officers become more heated as news from Nuremberg accumulates. Some prisoners maintain denial, insisting that atrocity reports are Allied propaganda. Others struggle with varying degrees of acknowledgement and responsibility. Brigadier General Heinrich Müller finds himself defending positions he's not sure he believes. His Bavarian stubbornness rebels against accepting that his lifetime of military service supported systematic evil. The army was not the SS, he argues during one particularly intense discussion. We fought honorably. Did we? Hartman asks quietly. Or did we simply fight without looking too closely at who we were fighting for? The question fractures the German officers into factions that mirror the larger divisions within their homeland. Some embrace the necessity of complete transformation. Others resist admitting any responsibility beyond conventional military defeat. Private First Class Michael O'Brien, the Iowa farm boy, inadvertently provides perspective during a conversation with Mueller about moral complexity. O'Brien's casual Midwestern directness cuts through elaborate justifications. General, my dad always said you can't unring a bell, O'Brien observes while they work in the camp garden, but you can choose what bells to ring going forward. The simplicity of this moral framework, acknowledging the past without being paralyzed by it, helps Mueller begin processing his own responsibility and potential redemption. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell incorporates moral education into her English classes, using American literature to explore themes of justice, responsibility, and reconciliation. Her selection of texts, The Scarlet Letter, To Kill a Mockingbird. Excerpts from Frederick Douglass exposes German prisoners to American traditions of moral struggle. Your country isn't the only one that has faced the gap between ideals and reality, she tells her students. The difference is what you do when forced to confront that gap. The most powerful moment comes when Master Sergeant Clarence Washington addresses a camp assembly about his own experiences with American justice and injustice. As a black soldier from Georgia, Washington understands the complexity of serving a country that doesn't always live up to its promises. I fight for America not because it's perfect, he tells the assembled prisoners, but because it's perfectible. Democracy means you get to keep trying to build something better. His words resonate particularly with Weber, who has struggled to understand how Americans can acknowledge their country's flaws while still believing in its essential goodness. That evening, Weber writes to Anna about Washington's speech. Perhaps the difference between democracy and dictatorship isn't the absence of mistakes, but the presence of mechanisms for correction. We had no such mechanisms. Dissent was treason, criticism was sabotage. The autumn progresses with German officers slowly dividing into those who can acknowledge their nation's crimes and those who cannot. The division carries implications for their futures who can be trusted with reconstruction, and who remains too dangerous to German democracy. Colonel James Crawford observes this sorting process with professional interest. His job includes identifying German officers who might contribute to post-war stability versus those who require continued detention. Some of them are genuinely transformed, he reports to his superiors. Others are just better at hiding their unchanged beliefs. The challenge is distinguishing between the two. As 1,945 draws to a close, the German officers at Camp Pritchard face a choice that will define their futures. Embrace the difficult process of moral reckoning, or retreat into the comfortable certainties of denial. Those who choose truth begin preparing for a different kind of return to Germany, not as defeated soldiers nursing grievances, but as citizens ready to build something better from the ruins of what they helped destroy. We feared the bullets, Hartmann writes in his journal. We should have feared our own silence. Christmas 1945 arrives at Camp Pritchard with an unexpected proposal that will test both American principles and German adaptability. Colonel James Crawford announces that prisoners will be allowed to organize their own holiday celebration, complete with traditional German customs and foods prepared in the camp kitchen. The offer startles German officers who expected their captors to suppress any expression of enemy culture. Instead, the Americans seem genuinely interested in facilitating cultural exchange rather than cultural domination. Chaplain Captain Richard Stone approaches General Hartmann with an even more radical suggestion. General, we've arranged for a combined Christmas service, German and American soldiers together. Would you be willing to read scripture in German? Hartmann stares at the chaplain in amazement. You want me to conduct religious services for the men who defeated me? I want you to remind all of us that some things transcend national boundaries, Stone replies. Like faith, like hope, like the possibility of peace. The Christmas preparation becomes a collaborative effort that reveals the depth of relationships formed between captors and captives. Master Sergeant Frank Kowalski works with Colonel Richter to design decorations that blend German and American traditions. In Detroit, we got lots of German families, Kowalski explains as they craft wooden ornaments in the workshop. My Polish grandfather fought the Germans in the First War, but he still appreciated their Christmas markets. Richter finds himself describing the Christmas traditions of his childhood. The elaborate wooden pyramids, the candlelit churches, the sense of community that transcended political divisions. As he speaks, he realizes he's not just sharing memories but preserving them for transmission to American friends. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell organizes a cultural exchange program where German prisoners teach American soldiers traditional Christmas songs while learning American carols in return. The music sessions become exercises in translation that go beyond language to encompass meaning and emotion. Major Weber struggles with the Christmas preparations, torn between gratitude for American kindness and loyalty to his homeland's traditions. His conflict deepens when Sergeant Robert Murphy, the soldier billeted with his wife, sends a Christmas package addressed to both Weber and Anna. The package contains practical items, coffee, chocolate, warm socks, along with a photograph of Murphy's own family farm in Iowa. The accompanying note reads, "From one farmer to another, hope we can be neighbors instead of enemies." Weber shares the package with his fellow officers, who examine each item with amazement. The generosity seems too extravagant for mere propaganda, too personal for political calculation. Why? Mueller asks, echoing Weber's earlier question to Lieutenant Commander Hayes on the prison ship. Why do they care about our comfort? The question receives an unexpected answer during the Christmas Eve service, when Private First Class Michael O'Brien sits beside Mueller in the chapel. During the singing of Silent Night, performed in both German and English, O'Brien leans over with a whispered comment. "My grandfather used to sing that song in German," O'Brien says. "Said it sounded better in the original. Guess music doesn't have nationality." Mueller realizes that O'Brien's casual acceptance of German cultural value represents something profound, the American ability to separate people from politics, to appreciate human achievements, while condemning human failures. The Christmas meal itself becomes a masterpiece of cultural synthesis. Chief Petty Officer Robert Anderson, now transferred to camp duty, supervises the preparation of traditional German Christmas foods alongside American holiday dishes. The kitchen staff, both American and German, work together with an efficiency that transcends language barriers. Dr. Margaret Chen observes the Christmas celebration from a professional perspective, noting how shared rituals help former enemies recognize their common humanity. Her psychological training helps her articulate what others feel intuitively. Ritual creates community. She explains to Colonel Crawford. When people participate in the same ceremonies, they begin to see themselves as part of the same group. The Christmas dinner seating breaks down traditional barriers between ranks and nationalities. American enlisted men sit beside German generals, engaging in conversations that range from farming techniques to family traditions, to philosophical questions about war and peace. Corporal Eddie Santos finds himself discussing radio repair with Colonel Richter, while comparing Christmas customs in Texas and Bavaria. Their technical conversation evolves into something more personal as they discover shared interests that transcend their military roles. "You know, Colonel," Santos says as they examine a German-made radio circuit, "if we'd met before the war, we probably would have been friends." Richter considers this possibility seriously. "Perhaps we still can be, after the war ends completely." I mean, the casual assumption that their friendship can survive the return to civilian life represents a transformation neither man fully recognizes. They've moved beyond the temporary camaraderie of shared captivity to genuine personal affection. The evening's most powerful moment comes during the gift exchange, where German prisoners present handmade items to American guards who have shown particular kindness. The gifts, carved wooden figures, hand-bound books, metalwork jewelry, represent countless hours of careful craftsmanship. Hartman presents Chaplain Stone with a carved nativity scene, explaining its symbolism as he hands over each figure. The shepherds represent ordinary people who witness extraordinary events, like soldiers who discover peace in the middle of war. Stone accepts the gift with visible emotion. "I'll treasure this, General. Not just as art, but as a symbol of what's possible when people choose understanding over hatred." Master Sergeant Clarence Washington receives a hand-forged steel cross from Mueller, who struggled for weeks to create something worthy of the sergeant's dignity and faith. The presentation becomes a moment of mutual recognition between two professional soldiers who have learned to respect each other across racial and national lines. "Sergeant," Mueller says formally, "you've shown me that strength and gentleness can coexist. This cross represents my appreciation for that lesson." Washington examines the metalwork with genuine appreciation. "General, this is beautiful work, but the real gift is the thought behind it." As the evening concludes with traditional Christmas carols sung in both languages, the German officers reflect on the transformation of their expectations. They entered captivity expecting brutality and found kindness. They prepared for humiliation and discovered dignity. Private Tommy Anderson approaches Weber with a final observation that captures the evening's significance. "Major, you know what I realized tonight? We're not really enemies anymore. Cam, we're just people who used to be enemies." Weber nods slowly. understanding that Anderson has articulated something profound about the nature of reconciliation. Enmity isn't permanent, it's a choice that can be unmade through the deliberate practice of recognizing shared humanity. Small acts, Weber writes to Anna that night, build bridges bigger than trenches. The Christmas celebration at Camp Pritchard becomes a template for the peace that must somehow follow the war, not just the absence of conflict, but the presence of genuine understanding between former enemies who have learned to see each other as fellow human beings. The war is ending. The real work of peace has begun. Spring 1946 brings news that will reshape the lives of every German prisoner at Camp Pritchard. The camp administration announces a repatriation program that offers choices previously unimaginable. Immediate return to Germany, delayed return with additional education, or participation in reconstruction efforts as civilian consultants. Colonel James Crawford explains the options during a general assembly that feels more like a university graduation ceremony than a military briefing. His tone reflects the respect these men have earned through months of adaptation and growth. Gentlemen, the war is officially over. Your status as prisoners of war will end within 90 days. However, your expertise in military organization and German culture makes you valuable resources for reconstruction efforts. The announcement creates complex emotions among the German officers. Freedom they have longed for comes with responsibilities they never anticipated. They must choose not just where to go, but who to become. General Hartmann faces the most difficult decision. Major Susan Kellerman approaches him with an offer that could reshape his future entirely. The U.S. Army wants his assistance in reorganizing German military units for peacetime civic duties, essentially asking a former enemy to help design the military structure of a democratic Germany. General, Kellerman explains during a private meeting, you understand German military culture better than any American officer. But you also understand democratic principles now. That combination makes you uniquely qualified to help build something new. Hartmann studies the official documents with amazement. 6 months ago, he expected execution. Now he's being offered a role in creating the Germany that will emerge from defeat. Why me? He asks. There are German officers with better credentials, fewer mistakes in their records. Because you've proven you can change, Kellerman replies simply. Change is the most important qualification for building a democracy. Colonel Richter receives a different but equally significant offer. Master Sergeant Frank. Kowalski informs him that American universities are seeking German technical experts to help document and preserve German engineering innovations for peaceful applications. Your tank design experience could help with civilian vehicle development, Kowalski explains. Tanks into tractors, you might say. The irony appeals to Richter using weapons expertise to create tools for cultivation rather than destruction. But accepting the offer means remaining in America longer than originally planned, missing more time with his family in Bavaria. Major Weber confronts a choice that will test his commitment to his new understanding of democratic values. The offer comes through Dr. Margaret Chen, who believes his psychological insights could help design programs for reintegrating German veterans into civilian society. You've experienced the transition from military to civilian thinking, Chen explains. That experience could help thousands of other German soldiers make the same journey. Weber realizes that accepting means acknowledging his own transformation publicly, admitting that American captivity changed him in fundamental ways. Some Germans will see this as betrayal rather than growth. Brigadier General Heinrich. Müller struggles most with the decision to remain or return. His Bavarian stubbornness rebels against accepting help from former enemies, even as his rational mind recognizes the benefits of continued cooperation. Chaplain Captain Richard Stone counsels Müller through his internal conflict during their regular discussions. Stone's gentle persistence helps Müller separate pride from principle. General, Stone observes, going home isn't about geography, it's about carrying the best of what you've learned to the place where it's needed most. The comment helps Müller realize that he can serve Germany better by learning more about democracy and then teaching those lessons to his countrymen. The camp's atmosphere changes as departure dates approach. American soldiers who have worked closely with German prisoners experience their own emotional conflicts about the approaching separations. Relationships that began as professional necessity have evolved into genuine friendships. Private First Class. Michael O'Brien struggles to say goodbye to Mueller, with whom he has played chess almost daily for months. Their games have become tutorials in democracy, with O'Brien explaining American political concepts through metaphors of strategy and sacrifice. "General, you've got to promise me something," O'Brien says during their final game. "When you get back to Bavaria, teach other people what you learned here. Not about America specifically, but about treating people decent." Mueller nods solemnly, understanding that he's accepting a sacred responsibility. "I promise, Tommy. But you must promise something too if you ever visit Bavaria. You must stay with my family. Let them thank you properly for your kindness." Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell organizes a farewell ceremony that celebrates cultural exchange rather than mourning separation. German prisoners present certificates of appreciation to American staff members who showed exceptional humanity during their captivity. The certificates, hand-lettered in both German and English, acknowledge specific acts of kindness that transcended military duty. Master Sergeant Clarence. Washington receives recognition for demonstrating that dignity has no color and leadership knows no boundaries. Corporal Eddie Santos is honored for proving that technical skill and human compassion can coexist in the same hands. The ceremony reverses traditional power dynamics, with former prisoners honoring their former captors for lessons in democracy and human decency. Hartman's farewell speech, delivered in carefully practiced English, articulates what many German officers struggle to express. "We came to America as prisoners of war. We leave as students of peace. The difference represents hope for all humanity." Colonel Crawford responds with his own reflection on the experiment in democratic captivity. "These men taught us something important. Former enemies can become future allies when treated with dignity and given opportunities for growth." The exchange of addresses and promises to maintain correspondence creates a network of relationships that will span the Atlantic long after the formal end of hostilities. These personal connections become the foundation for broader reconciliation between nations. As the first group of repatriated officers prepares to board ships for Germany, they carry more than personal belongings. They carry new concepts of leadership, citizenship, and international cooperation that will influence Germany's reconstruction. Weber writes his final letter to Anna from American soil. "I return to you as a different man than the one who left. Whether that difference serves Germany well depends on whether other Germans are ready to embrace the changes that peace requires." Victory was given, Hartman reflects in his journal. Dignity we earned. The distinction will prove crucial as these former enemies begin the long work of building a peace worthy of the war's sacrifices. Hamburg's harbor in summer 1946 bears little resemblance to the proud port that launched German naval power. Bombed-out warehouses line the waterfront, their skeletal remains reaching toward gray skies like accusing fingers. Among the refugees and displaced persons crowding the docks, returning POWs seem almost invisible, just more casualties of a war that ended differently than anyone expected. General Hartmann steps onto German soil for the first time in over a year, carrying a single suitcase and a briefcase full of documents that represent his new mission. The American authorities have assigned him to help establish the Bundeswehr, the democratic military force that will replace the Wehrmacht he once served. The reunion with his family takes place in a British administration center rather than his own home, which was destroyed in the bombing of Munich. Marguerite Hartmann looks older, her face bearing lines of worry and privation, but her eyes shine with relief as she embraces her husband. Their daughter, Greta, now 17, studies her father with curious intensity. The man who returns is recognizably her father, but somehow different, his posture less rigid, his manner more open to question and discussion. "You look American," she observes with teenage directness. Hartmann considers this comment seriously. "Perhaps I've learned some American ways of thinking. Whether that's good or bad depends on what we do with those ideas." Colonel Friedrich Brennan, the American officer who accepted Hartmann's surrender at the Rhine, now serves as liaison for the military reorganization program. He greets Hartmann not as former captor and captive, but as colleagues facing a shared challenge. "General, your first assignment is developing training protocols for officers in a democratic military," Brennan explains during their briefing. The challenge is maintaining military effectiveness while ensuring civilian control. Hartmann recognizes the delicate balance required. German military tradition emphasizes obedience and hierarchy virtues that served efficiency but enabled catastrophe when applied to immoral purposes. We must teach soldiers to think as well as obey, Hartmann tells Brennan. Independent judgment became treason under the Nazis. In a democracy, it becomes essential. Colonel Richter faces different challenges in his return to Bavaria. His village, occupied by American forces, has begun the slow process of physical and social reconstruction. Captain David Santos, promoted since their time together at Camp Pritchard, greets him warmly and introduces him to the local military government team. "Colonel, we need your help with something delicate," Santos explains. "Some former German officers are organizing resistance to denazification programs. Your voice might reach them when ours cannot." Richter understands the complexity of his position. Former comrades expect him to validate their grievances against occupation policies. American authorities expect him to support democratic transformation. His challenge is finding common ground between competing loyalties. The solution comes during a village meeting where Richter addresses both German civilians and American officials. His message emphasizes practical benefits rather than ideological conversion. "Democracy isn't American," he tells the assembled crowd. "Democracy is what allows Germans to control their own future instead of being controlled by others, whether those others are foreign occupiers or domestic dictators." Major Weber encounters the most personal challenges in his return to civilian life. His farm, while intact, requires reconstruction of soil depleted by wartime chemical farming and labor shortages. Sergeant Robert Murphy, the American soldier who was billeted with Anna, stayed beyond his required service to help with spring planting. The presence of an American soldier working German soil creates complex symbolism that Weber must navigate carefully. Neighbors view Murphy's assistance with suspicion. Is this charity, occupation, or genuine friendship? Weber addresses the question directly during a community gathering. "Sergeant Murphy isn't here as a conqueror helping the conquered. He's here as a farmer helping another farmer. The difference matters for how we rebuild our relationships with the world." The most significant reconstruction challenge comes in educational reform, where Weber's psychological insights prove valuable. Dr. Margaret Chen corresponds regularly with him about developing curricula that teach critical thinking rather than blind obedience. "German education produced excellent technicians and terrible citizens," Weber writes to Chen. "We must learn to create people who can question authority while still maintaining social responsibility." Brigadier General Heinrich Müller applies his military organizational skills to civilian reconstruction in his home region of Bavaria. His project involves converting former military installations into facilities for refugees and displaced persons, essentially turning instruments of war into tools of humanitarian relief. The work requires cooperation with Allied authorities, German civilian leaders, and refugee populations from across Eastern Europe. Müller's experience with American democratic practices helps him build consensus among groups with competing interests and mutual suspicions. "In the army, I gave orders and expected obedience," Müller explains to his civilian staff. "In democracy, I must build agreement and earn cooperation." The second approach takes longer but creates more durable results. The returning POWs face psychological challenges as well as practical ones. Chaplain Captain Richard Stone maintains correspondence with several former prisoners, providing counseling by mail for men struggling to integrate their American experiences with German realities. Weber writes to Stone about the difficulty of explaining American kindness to Germans who expected their captured soldiers to be mistreated. "How do I tell people that our enemies treated us better than our allies are treating each other?" Stone's response emphasizes the importance of personal example over theoretical explanation. "Live the lessons you learned. Let your actions demonstrate the values you discovered. Change happens through relationships, not arguments." The reconstruction efforts reveal both the possibilities and limitations of individual transformation. Former prisoners who embraced democratic values can influence their immediate communities. But broader social change requires institutional support and generational commitment. Hartman encounters this reality when some German military officers resist his proposals for democratic military education. Their opposition comes not from principled disagreement, but from psychological inability to accept that their previous beliefs were wrong. "We cannot force conversion," he reports to Colonel Brennan. "But we can create conditions where democratic values prove their practical superiority over authoritarian alternatives." The personal relationships formed during captivity provide crucial support for the returning officers. Regular correspondence with American friends offers encouragement during difficult periods and practical advice for specific challenges. Private Tommy Anderson writes to Mueller about agricultural cooperatives in Wisconsin, providing models for organizing Bavarian farmers into democratic associations. The technical information comes wrapped in personal news that maintains their friendship across national boundaries. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell corresponds with Weber about educational methodology, sharing American techniques for teaching civic responsibility alongside academic subjects. Her letters help Weber design programs that prepare German students for democratic citizenship. As 1946 progresses, the returning POWs begin to see results from their reconstruction efforts. Democratic institutions take root slowly, but steadily in their communities. Former enemies become partners in building a peace that serves mutual interests, rather than imposed settlement. From captives to builders, Hartman writes in his annual report to American authorities, "We carried the torch home." The metaphor captures something essential about the transformation of defeat into opportunity. These men didn't just survive the war, they used their captivity to prepare for a peace that none of them had imagined possible when they first surrendered on the banks of the Rhine. Their reconstruction efforts become laboratories for democratic governance, proving that former enemies can indeed become future allies when given proper opportunities and support. Bonn, West Germany, April 1949. The new German parliament building buzzes with activity as delegates prepare to ratify the basic law that will establish the Federal Republic of Germany. Among the observers in the gallery sits General Wilhelm Hartmann, now a civilian advisor to the Constitutional Convention, watching democracy take institutional form. The document being debated incorporates lessons learned through bitter experience provisions for civilian control of the military, protection of individual rights, and mechanisms for peaceful transfer of power. Many of these concepts trace their origins to conversations in American prison camps, where German officers first encountered democratic principles in practice. Konrad Adenauer, the elderly politician who will become West Germany's first chancellor, seeks Hartmann's counsel on military organization during a recess. Their conversation reflects the complex challenge of building democratic institutions from authoritarian traditions. "General, how do we ensure that our military serves the people rather than commanding them?" Adenauer asks. Hartmann's response draws directly from his American experience. By teaching officers that their highest duty is to the Constitution rather than to their commanders, personal loyalty must be subordinate to institutional responsibility. The principle seems simple in theory but requires fundamental cultural change in practice. German military tradition emphasized personal honor and hierarchical obedience virtues that enabled both great achievements and terrible crimes, depending on the character of leadership. Colonel Richter faces similar challenges in his new role as director of the Volkswagen reconstruction project. American authorities asked him to help convert the factory from military to civilian production, applying his engineering expertise to peaceful purposes. The symbolic power of beating swords into plowshares isn't lost on workers who remember building weapons for conquest and now build vehicles for commerce and family transportation. Henry Ford, too, visiting the plant as part of American industrial assistance, comments on the transformation he observes. 6 months ago, this facility produced tanks for the Wehrmacht, Ford tells Richter during a factory tour. Today it produces cars for German families. That's what victory really looks like, not destruction, but conversion. Major Weber applies his psychological insights to a different kind of reconstruction, designing programs for integrating German refugees from Eastern Europe into West German society. The challenge requires building communities from displaced populations while maintaining social cohesion and democratic values. His correspondence with Dr. Margaret Chen continues to provide theoretical framework for practical problems. Chen's letters help Weber understand how trauma affects political behavior and how democratic institutions can provide healing alternatives to authoritarian control. Displaced persons often seek strong leaders who promise simple solutions, Chen writes. Democracy requires patience with complex processes. Your job is building that patience through successful experiences with democratic problem-solving. Weber's refugee integration program becomes a model for other German states, demonstrating how democratic participation can channel displaced anger into constructive social change rather than destructive political extremism. The success of individual reconstruction efforts attracts international attention. General Lucius Clay, the American military governor of Germany, invites former POWs to participate in broader European reconstruction initiatives, recognizing their unique qualifications as Germans who understand democratic governance. Brigadier General Mueller receives assignment to help establish NATO's integrated command structure, applying his military organizational skills to the alliance system designed to prevent future European wars. The irony strikes him powerfully, a former Wehrmacht general, helping to build a military alliance against potential German aggression. Yet the work feels natural rather than treasonous, because it serves genuine German interests in long-term security and prosperity. 20 years ago, we built alliances for conquest. Mueller reflects during a planning session with Allied officers. Today, we build alliances for protection. The difference determines whether our children inherit war or peace. The personal relationships formed during captivity evolve into professional networks that span the Atlantic. Colonel James Crawford, promoted to general and assigned to the Pentagon, maintains regular correspondence with his former prisoners, now serving as informal consultants on German affairs. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell, teaching at Georgetown University, develops exchange programs that bring German students to America while sending American students to Germany. Her work builds on language instruction that began in a prison camp library and now encompasses cultural education for future leaders of both nations. Master Sergeant Clarence, Washington, retired from active duty and working in civil rights organizations, corresponds with Mueller about the parallels between American racial integration and German denazification, both processes requiring patient work to change hearts and minds through demonstration of democratic values in practice. These personal connections create informal channels of communication that supplement official diplomatic relations. When tensions arise between American and German policies, former prisoners and captors can provide context and perspective that prevent misunderstandings from escalating into crises. The most powerful testament to transformation comes during the 5th anniversary commemoration of VE Day in 1950. President Harry Truman invites several former German POWs to participate in ceremonies at Arlington National Cemetery, recognizing their contributions to building the peace that followed military victory. Hartmann's speech at the ceremony, delivered in careful English to an audience that includes American veterans who fought against his forces, articulates the larger meaning of their shared experience. 5 years ago, we stood on opposite sides of history's greatest conflict, he says, his voice carrying across the rows of white headstones. Today we stand together in defense of values that transcend national boundaries, human dignity, democratic governance, and peaceful resolution of international disputes. The ceremony includes German and American military units marching together in formation, former enemies now united in service to common principles. The symbolism captures something essential about the transformation of relationships between nations and between individuals. Chaplain Richard Stone, now serving as a military chaplain at the Pentagon, delivers the benediction that acknowledges both the cost of war and the hope of peace. We gather among the graves of those who died to defend freedom, Stone says. Their sacrifice becomes meaningful only if we use the freedom they purchased to build a world where such sacrifices become unnecessary. The anniversary ceremony marks a turning point in German-American relations, but more importantly, it demonstrates the possibility of genuine reconciliation between former enemies who commit themselves to shared values and mutual respect. Weber, attending the ceremony with his wife Anna, now an American citizen after immigrating to join refugee assistance programs, reflects on the journey from capture to partnership. When I was first taken prisoner, he tells a reporter covering the event, I expected to die as a symbol of German defeat. Instead, I lived to become a symbol of German redemption. The difference represents hope for all humanity. The reporter's article appears in newspapers across America and Germany, spreading the story of transformation from military captivity to civilian partnership. The narrative resonates with readers seeking evidence that war's destruction can generate peace's construction. As the 1,950 seconds begin, the former POWs and their American friends continue building relationships that will shape European-American cooperation for decades to come. Their children grow up as pen pals across the Atlantic, learning languages and cultures that were once separated by trenches and artillery. The German economic miracle of the 1,950 seconds and 1,960 seconds builds partly on technical knowledge, shared freely by American experts who learned to trust their former enemies. Marshall Plan assistance flows smoothly through personal relationships established in prison camps, where dignity replaced degradation as the foundation of international relations. Dignity survives war, Hartmann writes in his memoirs, published in both German and English. Not because armies stopped fighting, but because people remembered how to recognize each other's humanity. The book becomes required reading in both American and German military academies, teaching future officers that victory's ultimate purpose is creating conditions for honorable peace between former enemies. On quiet evenings in Bavaria, Mueller plays chess with visiting American students, teaching them the same democratic lessons he learned from a farm boy from Wisconsin in a prison camp that became a school for citizenship. The games continue, the lessons spread, and the legacy of dignity endures long after the last prisoner returns home and the last guard retires to civilian life. War ends, respect continues, and in that continuation lies the hope that humanity can choose understanding over hatred, construction over destruction, and peace over the endless repetition of conflict between people who have more in common than they dare admit. Based on the true experiences of German prisoners of war in American custody, 1945 to 1948. While individual characters are fictional, their experiences reflect documented historical realities of a remarkable experiment in democratic captivity that helped build the foundation for post-war German-American friendship.